The last 2 weeks of December bring some of the heaviest crowds to Walt Disney World for the entire year. I'm serious, it's that many people, but there are a lot of advantages to coming to Walt Disney World for those last 2 weeks. Today we're going to go over some of those pros and cons. The biggest con right off the bat, the crowds. The crowds are extremely intense. If you feel like you don't like crowds that much, you want to find a kind of quieter time at Walt Disney World, I would avoid the last 2 weeks. I would. But if you don't mind the crowds, you don't mind kind of working the day in a specific way to try and get attractions earlier in the morning, go for those fast passes, see other things around Walt Disney World like the resorts, then it's going to be fine. But the crowds are the biggest thing you want to think about. Now it's true, over recent years we've seen the crowd levels go up and down over this 2-week period, but we also see that management of those crowds has gotten a lot better. We see the lines get a little bit more compact, we see guests moving throughout those resorts a lot more than they did in previous years, so it's just a different management of crowds that we see now. Now by no means am I saying you cannot have fun those last 2 weeks because of the crowds, not at all. In my opinion, the crowds actually kind of add to the excitement a little bit for a moment or two, but the crowds themselves do dissipate depending on where you go. Of course, at the resorts you're going to find less crowds there, and during the early rope drop moments you'll find far fewer crowds for those prime attractions. But with every passing second after rope drop, and I said second not minute because that is very important, you'll find those crowds get more and more intense. Now like any trip to Walt Disney World, you're going to want to book those fast passes in advance. Think about dining well in advance and then make those reservations as soon as you can. Just as soon as you can, make them. But we've talked about that before. Today we're thinking about the other pros that you can find when you come to Walt Disney World for those last 2 weeks. Something that may surprise you about those last 2 weeks of December is that Disney runs a lot of the same shows, nighttime spectaculars, parades, and even ride overlays that you find at Mickey's Very Merry Christmas Party throughout the regular day during those last 2 weeks. From Minnie's wonderful Christmas time fireworks to Mickey's Once Upon a Christmas Time parade and even that awesome overlay at Space Mountain, you can find a lot of Christmas cheer that's usually exclusive only to the party during those last 2 weeks. Now it's true you don't get the character meet and greets and you don't get those special treats, but considering how much you do get, there are a lot of advantages to going to Walt Disney World during those last 2 weeks. I honestly was a bit surprised to see the overlay of Space Mountain. I thought that was spectacular, and seeing that Disney brings something extra special like that to the standard operating hours at Walt Disney World, in my opinion, 2 thumbs up. It really gives guests an incentive to go on Space Mountain during that time frame. One question that a friend brought to my attention, which I thought was really smart, they asked me, Michael, is it worth going to the party if you're going to be there the last 2 weeks of December? Now the party does not happen during those last 2 weeks, they end before that time frame, but if you're there between a party and those last 2 weeks and you have to decide between going to the party as a family or going to a couple nice dinners, I personally, this is me, I would go to those nice dinners and experience those party style things in the Magic Kingdom during the daylight hours. That's me, that's what I would choose just because I'd rather have those nice dinners, but you can make that decision. You can start thinking about what you want to prioritize in a little bit of a different way. Now I do not want to undervalue Mickey's Very Merry Christmas Party. Far fewer crowds, which honestly that's a big part of it. The fewer crowds, the treats, the character meet and greets. But you can catch a lot of the party activities during the day. Now if you're a longtime fan of Walt Disney World and you have been countless times and don't need to go on every single attraction every single time you go to Walt Disney World, this can be a unique opportunity for you to see other kind of shows, parades, overlays, even resort decorations that maybe you didn't see before. Now on the flip side of that, if it's your very first time going to Walt Disney World, and I bring this up because I saw a family with first time buttons on Christmas Day at the Magic Kingdom, and I'm thinking to myself, it's an interesting first impression that you get of Walt Disney World. Personally, I wouldn't recommend it for your very first trip. If it's the only time that you can get off, absolutely. You just make sure you plan way in advance. Think about every single detail about that trip, from every fast pass, every dining experience, where you want to be when. It's all about that planning in advance. If you do that, first impression, absolutely. But if it's your first time, you didn't do all that planning in advance, I actually would recommend a different time of year, just so that first impression is that magical one with standard crowds, not super super crowds. Another interesting factor that you may want to consider when you're thinking about those last 2 weeks of December is where you're going to stand for those fireworks and parades. Sometimes you like to stand on top of the train station and see it all from there, or maybe you have a spot right by the hub that you love. A lot of the times during a more crowded time of year, more of those areas are blocked off for different tours and events and special meetings that are happening. So sometimes maybe the top of the train station, parts of the hub, they're all blocked off for these special groups. So that's just something to consider. Think about that in advance. So maybe that prime spot that you love a lot, you want to hold for the entire day, it's sometimes not available as you get closer and closer to showtime. So just think about that in advance. Top of the train station, usually not available, and other parts of the hub also can be tough to find. Another big advantage of those last 2 weeks of December are the hours of operation for some of the parks. The Magic Kingdom, for example, more often than not will stay open until midnight every single night of those last 2 weeks, which is great if you're a night owl, you want to see it all, you want to get some of those late night pictures or go on rides when everyone else is trying to get out of the park. It is fantastic for you. Now, if you're an early bird, it is open a little bit earlier as well, so those park hours are just kind of expanded during this time of year, but it's something to think about, something to consider if you're thinking about maybe you want to go to Walt Disney World. I'm a night owl, I love it, maybe that's for you. In addition to all of that, during the holiday season and especially New Year's Eve, that's one that's on my mind quite a bit, there are special parties and events that you couldn't find any other time of year. Whether it's a super dance party at Epcot or super late night hours of the Magic Kingdom or a dance party there as well, there are some things that you can't see any other times of year during those last 2 weeks. In my opinion, the last 2 weeks of December are a great time to be at Walt Disney World, but that being said, my time is not limited as if I was on vacation. I go after work or on the weekends. If you're on vacation, just think about those crowds. Think about the fact that you're not going to be able to accomplish as many rides and different attractions as you would during other times of year. If you don't mind that, it can be a fantastic time to visit Walt Disney World. Those are my thoughts about the last 2 weeks of December at Walt Disney World. I'd love to hear yours in the comments below. Do you love it? The special shows, parades, dance parties, or are those crowds enough for you to say, not for me, not for me? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for being a part of the magic with me. Until next time, have a magical day.